As Jackson said, I'm Jesse Kornick. I am one of the co-founders and CEO of Nave Analytics. We are providing data for decision support for irrigation, planting, all without having to put additional sensors out in the field. And as Jackson mentioned earlier, we are integrating into the Sentinel platform. So he asked me here today to talk a little bit about irrigation agronomy and all of that stuff, but honestly, you guys are all here. You're probably not the ones that need to hear that talk. So how do I go forward? On the laptop? Okay. No? There we go. Yeah, you guys are here today. So you are probably the ones that attend the meetings, do the education, and know the basics of irrigation agronomy, right? So we'll zoom through that a little bit and focus a little bit more on some of the implementing pieces. But water management is often the invisible loss. Granted, the pictures on the slides are the more visible examples of over or under irrigating. But at the end of the season, you don't always see bad water management until you get to the yield monitor. And it's trying to figure out how do we watch that throughout the season to make sure that we are not getting to a point where it's a visible issue. So, this is the older version. Okay, well, we're gonna call an audible then, because I added a couple of slides, but they're not in this version. But honestly, Bob actually covered what I was going to talk about in his, because nitrogen management, water management all ties together, right? So when you're managing irrigation, you're managing a fuel gauge, a battery, what have you, right? Your soil profile. The capacity of that battery is dependent on your textures, sand, silt, clay. And then throughout the growing season, you're trying to make sure that you're managing that water, that capacity, somewhere between field capacity, right? We don't want to get to saturation where we're actually just pushing water through or it's running off. You don't want to be above field capacity. You don't want to be below max allowable depletion, which is about 50% of your plant available water. Below that, you start getting into damage to the crop due to drought conditions. So managing that capacity, that battery, that fuel gauge, however you want to picture it in your head throughout the growing season. And the factors that go into, obviously, that battery, the size of your storage is your soil texture, but then what the crop is doing above ground, right? You have your evapotranspiration. You have the amount of water that is leaving through evaporation from the soil surface, through transpiration, the plant's actually breathing. And then the third aspect that we often forget about, the deep percolation, getting soil moisture or water pushed through the full profile. The other thing that plays into that throughout the growing season is your expanded effective zone throughout the season, right? As the plant grows, the root zone expands. Your plant is able to access water throughout more of the profile, and so your capacity, your battery storage actually expands throughout the season as well. So it's always kind of a moving target. How do we actually know what's going on? How do we actually manage that effectively? So this is where we run into a decision gap, is how do we get to that solid management of water? This is where it kind of goes against the company that I'm building. Adding data isn't your first step, right? You have to understand the soil that you're working with. So that's understanding the variability across the field, if that's through soil mapping or different things like that, understanding the size of the battery you're working with. The next step is understanding the system, the irrigation system. Having a system audit, making sure that your pivot is efficient, also understanding how much water is being applied throughout the growing season, not just turning it on, running an inch, and assuming that an inch is being applied, right? So you can't manage your irrigation until you understand what you're actually doing. So I oftentimes say we have to take a step back. We have to know that we're effectively applying the water that we think we're applying throughout the growing season. Manage that throughout the season. Like I said, it changes throughout the season. And then at the end of the year, look back at our management practices. You're oftentimes doing, looking at yield maps and all of that stuff. How many of you are actually relating that back to your irrigation practices? And throughout the season, tying that to crop water use, and when were we maybe applying too much water? When were we not applying enough? So making sure that your irrigation management is actually worked into your post-season analysis as well. The monitoring your battery piece throughout the growing season, that's where we can add data. So my piece, the company that we're building, really comes in on like maybe your third step of irrigation management. You gotta get through the first two before you get to looking at stuff that we're doing. So what are we doing at NAVE? We are building the water balance framework without having to have sensors in the field. So we're using satellite data. We bring in a couple different pieces of satellite data, weather information, information about your soil properties, as well as how much water is being applied throughout the growing season. This is where I go back to, you have to know what you're applying before we can manage it any further. Within our system, we then add in crop modeling about what's happening above ground, hydrology modeling about how water is moving through the profile. And from there, we're able to generate information such as root zone soil moisture information, again, without having to have the sensors out in the field. If we have sensors in the field, we can use those into the modeling, but we don't have to. Crop water use information, so how much water is that crop actually using at different stages throughout the growing season based on that specific field's conditions. So taking into account the weather that crop receives, how much biomass is out there, the higher or lower productivity areas of the field, and drought and leaching potential. So, is your field at potential of actually pushing your nutrients through the profile, or is there areas of your field that are getting a little bit too dry? Trying to visualize and helping you guys understand all of that. So you can really think of what we're doing at NAVE as having a sensor for every pixel across that field boundary. So being able to use the satellite data, we can scale this tool across many more acres. You don't have to actually go out and physically put anything in the field. Satellite data is also significantly more cost effective than hardware. And then you're also getting a picture of the entire field, not just the individual places where we have sensor passing. So where we really differentiate with NAVE is being able to take the surface level information that we get from satellite. So the satellite data that we're looking at is soil water content as well as biomass, crop biomass. The information for the soil water content is the very top of the profile. What we do then is expand that through the entire profile. So the top graph there is going to be field average of your whole soil profile. So the idea being you want to be keeping your soil moisture level within that green optimal zone. You don't want to get into the nearing depletion, the red zone, and you don't want to be too far into the nearing saturation zone to be able to make sure that you're being able to take rainfall, use rainfall as effectively as possible. But then on the bottom, we're also modeling layers throughout the profile. So you're also getting information about the different layers throughout the profile. This image is a field average, but we also have that data behind every pixel across the field boundary. Okay. We have been building the system for about 4 years now. It is trained on soil moisture probe data. We've collected data from close to 50 different locations over several different years, and each one of those fields gets about more than 25,000 data points every day throughout the growing season. So our system is trained on a large data set. We continue to retrain the models every year. Right now, across the board, as far as like soil textures and all that stuff, we're at about 93% accuracy with soil moisture probes. So any given day, we're within about 93% accuracy, and that's when we look at the drill down to the actual pixel where the probe is installed, and getting as accurate or as close of comparison as possible. So want to kind of hit home, and I must have drank way too much coffee today. I'm talking far too fast. Want to drill home a little bit of a water management ROI situation. Because oftentimes, you go through the whole winter process, planning process, you're making all your seeding decisions, your fertility decisions, all this stuff, and water management is kind of, you don't really start thinking about it till you get into the season, right? It's kind of an afterthought. And even in the season, it's like, I'll just turn on the pivot today to be safe. We don't quite think about the numbers when it comes to irrigation and water management. So just to lay that out a little bit, average cost in Nebraska to pump water, $7 to $10 an acre inch. By managing your water more effectively, you can increase your nitrogen efficiency. This all ties together, right? It's all pulling together. So by having good water management, maybe increase your nitrogen efficiency 15%. That might be a little bit high for this room because you guys are all doing a good job already, or you're proactively managing your nitrogen already. But then also by having good water management, you're not having periods throughout the growing season where that crop is getting a little bit too dry, and you're potentially losing some yield to drought, or you're keeping that field too wet throughout the season. Its roots are always wet. It's not transpiring very well. You actually lose some yield base because you're keeping the soil too wet. So good water management throughout the season, maybe looking at about a 5% yield increase from that. So if we kind of add that up, if we can save about 2 passes a season by making sure that we're applying water when the crops actually need it, look at that, about $15 an acre. Good nitrogen management, $20 an acre. Increased yield, about $50 an acre. So just by having good irrigation management, which is sometimes an afterthought, increasing your productivity $80 an acre, put that across the farm, gets to be a decent sized number, probably something that we should pay attention to a little bit more across the board. So that's why we are very, very excited about the integration with Sentinel. Obviously, water management and nitrogen management or fertility management across the board are very tied together. So being able to have analytics about both in one platform, one place to go look at them, being able to tie your leaching potential into your fertility decisions is good for everybody, right? Have it all in one place. So with that, I talked really fast, so we have plenty of time for questions. Happy to dig into kind of the data that we're providing a little bit more, anything like that.
How many acres have you been on broadly?
Yeah, so this past season we were on about 40,000 acres globally, 8 countries. The year before we were about 20,000 acres, so we're probably close to 100,000 acres through our lifespan. Yeah. And yeah, we've worked, most of our work, obviously Nebraska, US, but we also have done stuff in Canada, Brazil, Europe, Australia, and finding that the models transfer really well across geographies because we are taking so much feedback from the satellite data and what that's actually telling us. Minor tuning when we go to different geographies, but honestly the system is built to be very flexible based on wherever we're at.
So like on your soil graphs, how often does that update?
Yeah, so it's updating every day. I think Jackson kind of touched on it before. The satellite data that we're using is planetary variables. So that is satellite data that is using a constellation of many different satellites. And so we're actually getting data every day. We're not having to wait for one satellite to make another overpass. It's also microwave data, so it's not interfered with by clouds or atmospheric haze. So we aren't losing images throughout the season to clouds, shadows, when Canada's on fire, things like that. So we truly are getting the satellite feedback every day to inform the models. And so we run a daily production cycle. So about midday, every day we're getting our data updated.
So a lot of our growers, that's the first thing they do in the morning is look at that. Can you adjust that?
So we're looking at a couple different ways where, can we use production engineers out of a different country for their working hours and different things like that. So our latency comes from getting the satellite data. So it's collected yesterday, gets downloaded. We get that data about mid-morning today, so it's about 12 hours latency or maybe a little bit more by the time we get the satellite data, and then we have to run our processing and get it posted. So we're at a little bit of mercy on how fast the satellite data can get to us, and then we are trying to make sure that we're running our data production and getting that as quick as possible. So when you're looking at the data, really think about that you're looking at yesterday's data, but today you're going to get an updated version, right? So we're about 24 hours latency if you're looking at the data and trying to make the decisions, but we're working on how we can get that faster. Yeah.
Wow, that's loud. Two-part question.
Sure.
What's your meter pixel resolution that you're using? And then could you get it to the USDA NAS for better imagery and acreage reporting?
So the soil water content satellite data that we're using is 100 meter resolution. We do have access to 20 meter now that we're playing with, and we're trying to figure out where the added compute costs, does that translate to row crop, or is that more specific for specialty crops or smaller field sizes? 100 meter resolution when we're looking at irrigation management. How resolute are you actually managing that water when you have a giant sprinkler going around a field? So 100 meter resolution of the soil moisture, we feel like is giving is really good detail, right? You're used to making a decision off of one or maybe two probes in a field, and now you have 60 or more. So it is really increasing the amount of data that you're getting out of the field. The crop biomass information that we're using is 10 meter resolution, so that's what goes into the crop water calculations. We have some field health that's not integrated into Sentinel just yet, but some different things like that. So the crop biomass, the crop water use stuff is 10 meter resolution. And sorry, the second question is probably a little bit above my pay grade. I don't know that I have that much pull yet.
Jessica, one of the things I really appreciated is the way you touched on the pivot audits. I think that's extremely important to get everything right there. As I was watching your presentation and looking at some of the information from Sentinel earlier, is especially now with the merger with the two of you guys working together, do you see a future where maybe even the potential on the rain-fed fields, the rain-fed acres, we could even start looking at nutrient management that way with this level of technology? Is that something that could be considered?
Yeah, it's not the future, it's now. We can produce this data set on any field. It doesn't have to be irrigated. It's actually easier for us to produce this data on dryland fields. We don't have to account for the as-applied irrigation. So we can produce the data. For us, it's always been where are we getting the ROI? What are the use cases? When we talk about working with Sentinel and they're doing the nitrogen and the fertility recommendations, there's your ROI, right? That's the use case for it. So by getting the two companies working together, then that data becomes much more useful on the dry land. Because if you're looking at our stuff for irrigation management, you're not doing anything on dry land, right? So you kind of forget about it. But when we pull it into the overall picture of fertility management, then things like leaching potential, drought potential, current water status, all that stuff comes into play. So yeah, absolutely.
So how, at the beginning of the year when we still got a cover crop and we're terminating it, but
Mhm.
How does that affect your water management and with corn just coming out of the ground? It's the same, kind of got the same biome.
Yeah, so that's kind of the crossover between, so we have planting analytics as well. So we have a tool that is for planting logistics and field conditions leading up to planting. Even in that tool, we're looking at the biomass, right? Like we're looking to see if there is biomass, if there's anything using water at that point in time. When we start modeling for in season, we're looking at the biomass right away. So if there is a cover crop out there, we see that cover crop using water, and so that's all worked into the modeling. As that dies and then the corn comes up, so that's where having the satellite data, we're watching exactly what's happening with the biomass out there, what's using water, what's not, and that like curve. So it's accounted for by using the satellite data. So that's the advantage of bringing that piece in. Did that answer your question? That was kind of a roundabout answer.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be around all day. Bradley's here for most of the day. He's another co-founder of Nave Analytics. Oh, we got another question. Sure.
What are you actually measuring? You said you're using microwave. What spectrum are you measuring with your satellites?
This is newer technology, and so we're usually used to talking about wavelengths and indices and different things like that. So the data that we're actually using is taking the data from several different satellites and giving us a variable. And so what we're getting is a measurement of soil moisture in the very top of the profile. Then we take that and everything else that we know about that field, extrapolate that through the profile. So that's how we're actually calculating the soil moisture throughout the profile. Does that answer? Okay. I guess it is microwave data, so that's the wavelength that is doing the measurements. So. I'll be around all day if there's any more questions. I'm happy to talk about what we're doing with Nave, about the integration with Sentinel, all of that stuff.